Wednesday evening Bible study, looking at the texts from the prophets about the promise of the coming of Christ and Christ as Messiah, Christ as Savior and Redeemer. From about 722 to 586 BC, and this won't be on the test, so you won't have to worry about it. For roughly, let's see, 100 and what? I never could do the backwards thing from the BC perspective. 140 years, there was absolute disastrous turmoil between the two kingdoms of Israel and their surrounding neighbors. A turmoil that often put them on opposite sides. And when King Uzziah died, Isaiah, the young man who witnessed God's appearance at that time, when King Uzziah died, saw the miracle of God's appearing in the temple. Everybody gathered there to pray because Uzziah was dead and all the treaties were null and void, which was the custom back then, and there was uncertainty all around them, and political uncertainty had gotten worse. Assyria in the northern kingdom, above the northern kingdom rather, was a powerful force. Babylon to the east of Judah, or the southern kingdom, hadn't quite come on the scene as a great force yet, but these are two small little kingdoms among some other small little kingdoms, and they fought all the time. Had a hard time. And what happens is Isaiah sees God in the temple when they all gather for prayer, when they're worried about the nation. And you know what we always do that. If there's a big earthquake or a big fire or a big pandemic, we all say, we're praying for you and you pray for us, and we'll get together at church and we'll pray. And because we're very religious people. We're as religious, I think, in America as they were about the time that King Uzziah died. They had all the challenges of fighting against self-interest and jealousy and greed and all of the struggles with trying to have a compassionate heart for people less fortunate than them. They exhibited the qualities of human beings when human beings are threatened. They want to get things in order. And that's not unusual. But what happened with Isaiah was a little different. They were having a national day of prayer, and all of a sudden God appeared, high and lifted up, surrounded by seraphim and cherubim, and his train filled the temple. That's in Isaiah chapter 6. They were uncertain about lots of things. And by the time Ahaz was the king in the southern kingdom, they were troubled about the alliances the northern kingdom had made with other little kingdoms, and Aram was troubled. Or Ahaz rather was troubled. And the Lord spoke to Ahaz, which is good. If you have a leader, you want your leader to be able to hear God speak. Now, of course, you want it to be the leader you voted for. You don't want the leader you didn't vote for to hear God. Oh, yes, you do. People wanted some word from God. And the Lord spoke to Ahaz, chapter 7, verse 10. and said, "Ask a sign from me, for I am the Lord your God. And let the sign be as dramatic as you want it. Let it be as deep as the sea, or down in the deep depths of death itself. Let it be one that reaches the pinnacles of your highest achievement or hope, as high as heaven. And Ahaz, who's, he's as crafty as Moses. He wants to sound good in front of God, which we all do. That's why we talk funny when we pray publicly. Ahaz said, I will not ask, and I will not be putting the Lord to the test. Well, he happened to be with Isaiah at this time, and Isaiah said, well then listen, O house of David, it's too little a thing for you to weary mortals, that you would also weary God. In other words, here you are, present with God, who speaks to your heart and says, ask me anything. Oh, I wouldn't presume to do that. You're too great and I'm too mortal and too humble. When Isaiah said, not only do you worry everybody else to death in the kingdom, but are you going to worry the Lord too? He said, therefore the Lord will give you the sign, whether you ask or not. He said, behold, a young woman, an Alma, a young woman will be with child and bear a son, and she shall name him Emmanuel, and he'll eat curds and honey by the time he knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the child even knows how to refuse evil and choose good, the land before whose two kings you're in dread will both be deserted and pass away. I have a hard time as a Christian trusting the Lord. I think part of that is because I make mistakes, and once they're made, I think to myself, well, that was foolish. I'm not worthy of God. Of course I'm not. Not by any stretch of my actions. And God's too holy and far away, and God's too great. And even when God, with his immanent presence here on earth, God who's in our hearts and minds and in our world, our families, even in our country, God can't be bothered with someone who makes as many mistakes as I do, or who forgets to be compassionate or generous. And there's a parallel there for any one of us who feels like, well, I'm not a very good Christian. There's a few good Christians, not many. I know two that are dead. Billy Graham was pretty steadfast. Mother Teresa, they always come to my mind. I know some really good fellas that were pastors who inspired me and who often were willing to mentor me, and all but one of them is dead. But here, fortunately, Isaiah is standing with Ahaz and says, listen, don't be such a wuss. Call upon the Lord and see what happens. Especially since God says, call upon me, Ahaz, and see what happens. Well, no, I don't want to bother you with all my stuff. I don't want to be, sacrilegious or self-righteous. And so Isaiah gets kind of mad at him and says, you're going to worry everybody to death, and now you've decided to worry God to death. Well, here's the news. God's going to give you a message. He's going to give you a sign. He's going to show you a vision. He's going to give you a promise. And he's going to come through with his promise because he always does. There will be a young virgin. By the way, the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Jewish Bible, refers to an Alma as a Parthenos, or virgin, and also refers to her as Echi Virgo, which means we may behold the virgin. I stress that point because a lot of times in this modern world we say, well, she had a baby and we don't know the circumstances. Oh, yes, we do. The circumstances were here in this vision. The circumstances were Gabriel, who came to tell Mary that she was going to have a baby. She hadn't been married. She was engaged. And she was a virgin. And God promised Israel to send his Messiah and made good on that promise in this word he made here and in the words Gabriel brought from God to Mary. So it's one of those things I just won't, personally, I won't entertain reason over the testimony of Scripture. Yes, of course. Yes, I know. The world is part of a planetary system orbiting around the sun, and we're a little planet system, a planetary system among a million others in the galaxy, and there are other galaxies. Of course, it's God's world. It's God's universe. I'm not saying I've abandoned science. Yes, if you can get a vaccine, take it. Yes, if you get a cold and it develops into pneumonia, go to the doctor. But I'm saying that I'm not going to second guess God. I don't want to. I have in the past, but that doesn't work. A virgin will conceive and bear a son, and his name will be God with us. So that what it is I'm sending you is not a prophet. Prophets are a dime a dozen. They're not quite as common as Methodist preachers and Baptist preachers, but they were not uncommon presence in the world at that time. And so the Lord said, I'll make the impossible possible. I'll do something higher than heaven and deeper than Sheol. I'll make something so fantastic it's beyond reason. When this young girl, who, as was customary, was engaged, meaning she was between, most likely, the age 14 and 16 at that time, will become the evidence and the sign, the ark of the covenant, if you will. She will be the treasure that King David could never be. She'll be the treasure that Moses only hoped for. She'll be the treasure that Adam and Eve couldn't possibly believe would ever come to pass. Yeah. I'll send myself into your world in human flesh. I still hold that the most special description of this came when I was in Denver. I was pastor of Salem Church. And it was Advent, about this time of year. And I had the kids surround me up at the Christmas tree, because yes, we have Christmas trees, because yes, we believe Christmas trees, which Luther started as a custom in the church, is okay to have in the church. We call them Christmas trees, just to be on the safe side. And we were gathered up there for the children's time, and I said, Jesus could have come any way Jesus chose to be our Savior. Why in the world do you suppose he decided to be born as a little baby and come that way into the world? And to this day, I have wondered what kind of response was I going to give to that question that I asked. I have no idea. Because Chloe, one of the kids, she was not quite 5. She raised her hand and she said, well, I know. She said, because, and she put her little arms together, she said, he needed to be rocked and loved and sung to and fed. He needed to know what it was like to have a mama. sometimes God will give you a sign just to make you aware that He's present with you. This miracle is going to happen. And it doesn't matter who's on your side, how small your kingdom is, how mighty Babylon is, how scary Assyria is. It doesn't matter who your cousins in the northern kingdom decide to ally themselves with. It doesn't make any difference, because this place, this people, this promise is of God. And so are you. Yes, Isaiah is powerful and my favorite prophet because he's poetic. And he has a lot to say about Jesus. But the thing that's wonderful is, Isaiah says, you remember when he promised Adam and Eve? You remember when he gave Adam a promise and saved Isaac? You remember when he gave David a promise? And if anybody on earth didn't deserve a promise, it was David. He has chosen us to be the vessel into which salvation will come for the world. You know, people amaze me. They say things like, well, you know, I like the Jews all right, but you know, they're stingy and they're good at business and law and stuff. And I'm going, hush, hush. Or as my brother-in-law says to his wife, my sister, when he's not in a bad mood and she keeps talking and talking, he'll say, honey, hush. Don't talk about anybody. Don't talk about the people in Africa with disdain. Don't get mad at the Chinese because of Lin Shu Hua or whatever his name is. Don't worry about the things that you can't control. But instead, when you got your worries, call upon the Lord. Because He hears you. And He's listening. That's why He hears you. And He cares. That's why He's listening. And He loves you. That's why He made you. Isaiah was a very impertinent prophet because he started out as a young man. Isaiah was impertinent because after you've seen God and heard God speak right straight at you, a lot of things don't scare you anymore. The banker doesn't scare you. The judge doesn't scare you. Don't make a judge mad, but they don't scare you. Or some king doesn't scare you. And the king liked Isaiah. But he said, no, I won't bother you, Lord, with nothing. And Isaiah jumped him and said, bother the Lord all you want to. He likes it. Because He has a promise in store for you. And that doesn't just apply to Ahaz and Israel. That applies to you and me. Or you and I. It applies to me. It applies to you and me. And in addition to that, it applies to the purpose of Jesus coming. And we who are His followers, not because we're so smart or good or humble. We fight with all kinds of things, jealousy and resentment, and we get hurt feelings, you name it. But we're the children of God on a journey toward a place and a time of God's perfection. Apart from everything we see and understand, beyond what we can comprehend, we're headed for a place. And that's what this Isaianic promise is. A virgin shall conceive and bear a son. There's only one other thing that we'll talk about today, because Advent is the time to get ready for Christmas. And that means get ready for Christmas. Get little presents together if you can afford them, and make a little Christmas tree if you have availability for one. And string up some lights and make some little, decorations and and place settings at the table, whatever. Because our activity, including the little lights out in the yard, are a sign to the world that we're still ready to receive the will of God. So in chapter 14 of Isaiah, these words, the Lord will have compassion on Jacob, southern kingdom, and will again choose Israel, both sections, and will set them in their own land, and aliens will join them and attach themselves to the house of Jacob. These sinners will become people who are interested in our way of thinking, living, praying, loving, being. It's not a bad promise. You have a job to do. You have an evidence to perform. You have a message to be shared by your life. And that's where the challenge comes for us today. Whoever chooses to trust God when God calls them to believe, to accept Christ, calls them to follow Christ, calls them to love each other in His name, it becomes incumbent on us, the responsibility that we share, to practice mercy, to walk humbly before God, to love justice. There's not a lot of contradiction in the message of Scripture. There is, however, a lot of truth. There's a time coming when I'll have compassion on Jacob in the south and Israel in the north, and I will set them in their own land, the time before they were divided. And the strangers will come from other lands and attach themselves to this house. And the nations, all the nations, will take them and bring them to their place. And the house of Israel will possess the nations and as male and female slaves in the Lord's land. In other words, these people are going to be as dependent on their faith and testimony as Judaism itself was dependent. And they will take captive those who were their captors and rule over those who oppressed them. In other words, there's a rightness to people of faith that has more power and dignity and certainly more perseverance than everything that you can imagine militarily. You know, nuclear weapons, rockets, jets, stuff in outer space, armies, guns. No, the real nature of humanity is found most often when our hands are extended toward each other in peace. Are things full of peace right now? No. Is the world an uncertain place like it was when Ahaz was king and Isaiah was a prophet? It sure is. But I know whose land it is. I know whose world it is. I know whose lives we are. We're children of God. We're life connected to God. We live in a promise. I know what our soul is like. Our soul is that thing that came into existence by God's will and God's breath and God's purpose. Isaiah was a preacher who, as we study Isaiah, after Epiphany, we'll study some Isaiah. He was faithful and good and kind and perseverant when Israel was disobedient, when times were hard, when Israel went into captivity, and when Israel decided to turn their hearts back to God. He was always there. Because he believed this promise that we celebrate, that we call Christmas. Lord, bless and keep us in your will, and with your grace sustain us and redeem us from our mistakes and wrongdoing. And help us, Lord, to be grateful for every gift and faithful in every trial. Lord, help us to care. Lord, help us to love. And let the season of Christmas be for us an acted sign, a celebration of generosity and love and forgiveness and fellowship, that we may act out in our faith what you have called us to trust in your Son Jesus. For we ask it in his name. Amen. God bless you.